More often than not, it's offensive players who win the MVP awards and who get all of the attention. But make no mistake, the defensive end of the court deserves more credit, as it's literally half of the game. Today, I'm breaking down my list of the top 10 greatest defensive players in NBA history, and let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with these choices. Before I get into it, let me first explain how my list works. Although defensive accolades are important, they are not the only major factor, as they're given based on the media members voting, which I might not necessarily agree with. The defensive awards also have a lot to do with who they were up against, so obviously, if the competition was stronger, then it's harder to win the award on a yearly basis. And lastly, this list is a combination of peak defensive abilities and longevity. For example, a player like Mark Eaton was one of the greatest rim protectors in his prime, but he had a relatively shorter career. When you compare his 10 seasons of elite defense to Tim Duncan's 19, well then it's obvious who's making the list and who isn't. So without further ado, let's get into it. Number 10, Michael Jordan. MJ is the only guard to make my list, which really tells you just how difficult it is for a perimeter defender to stand out amongst the crowd. MJ deserves the spot though, as he was an absolute menace to opposing guards. He was first team all-defense a total of 9 times, which is tied for the most in NBA history. Among guards, he has the highest blocks per game average in NBA history, and he's currently 4th on the all-time list in total steals, regardless of the fact that he played fewer seasons than most of the players in the top 25. At his best, he won the Defensive Player of the Year in 1988, where he averaged 3.2 steals and 1.6 blocks, which made him first overall in steals per game and first among guards in blocks per game. Number 9. Ben Wallace. His longevity may have not been enough to get him in the top 5, but his peak was certainly enough to get him in the top 10. This 6'9" center/power forward was one of the strongest players to ever do it, and he was one of the few men who could actually do a decent job of containing a prime Shaquille O'Neal. His best years were on the suffocating Detroit Pistons of the mid-2000s, and it was during this stretch that he won the Defensive Player of the Year award 4 times in a span of 5 seasons. Regardless of the fact that he was relatively undersized as a center, he was still able to be a solid shot blocker, leading the league overall in the 2002 season. He was also solid at stripping the ball from the opponent, as he averaged 1.3 steals over the course of his career. In total, he made 6 all-defense teams, which is actually the fewest of all eligible players on my list. And as I mentioned before, that was a product of his lack of elite longevity. But when he was at his best, there are very few defenders more intimidating than Wallace. Number 8. Scottie Pippen. Although Michael Jordan may have averaged slightly more steals and more blocks, there was no question that Pippen was the most smothering on-ball defender for their 6 championship runs. Somehow, Scottie never won the Defensive Player of the Year award, which was probably a product of there being so many all-time great defensive centers in his era, but Pippen was the runner-up to Dikembe Mutombo in 1995 and to Gary Payton in 1996. In the totality of his career, Pippen made 10 all-defense teams, and 8 of those selections were first team, which ties him for the 5th most in NBA history. Within his complete body of work were some key moments where Pippen displayed his abilities, like when he took on the assignment of defending and containing Magic Johnson in the 1991 NBA Finals. Number 7. Tim Duncan. Just like Pippen, Duncan never won the Defensive Player of the Year award, as he never led the league in steals or blocks. And with Bruce Bowen on his team for some years, you could even argue that there were stretches where he wasn't even the best defensive player on his team. But for what Duncan lacked in peak performance, he made up for it with his insane longevity and consistency. For his career, Duncan earned a whopping total of 15 all-defense team selections in his 19 years of pro basketball. That's easily the most selections in NBA history. Many players enjoy being an elite defender in their 20s, but Duncan carried that tremendous impact into his late 30s, as his intelligence and rim protection was a pivotal aspect of their final championship run in 2014. Number 6. Kevin Garnett. Especially during his time in Minnesota, the big ticket was a nightmare for opposing teams, as he was always bringing the energy and intensity on defense. Like the legendary Hakeem Olajuwon, Garnett was usually among the league leaders in blocks and steals simultaneously. For many years, his elite defense appeared to go unnoticed, but in his first season as a member of the contending Boston Celtics, he was rewarded with the Defensive Player of the Year. In total, he made 12 All-Defense teams, which is tied for the second most of all time, and 9 of those were first team, which is tied with Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, and Gary Payton for the most of all time. Add in the fact that he shut the Lakers down in the paint during the 2008 championship run, and I'm very comfortable having Garnett just outside my top 5. Number 5. David Robinson. Well before the big fundamental was locking down the paint for San Antonio, the Admiral was doing it at a higher level. Over a 6-season stretch from 1990 to 1996, Robinson was averaging a monstrous 3.6 blocks per game. All-time great rim protectors like Tim Duncan and Dwight Howard never had a single season where they averaged that many blocks per game, and Robinson did it over a 6-year stretch. He was also regularly among the league leaders in steals per game, regardless of the fact that he played at the center position, and he got as high as 2.3 steals per game in 1992, which was 5th in the league overall. He was the Defensive Player of the Year in 1992, and he earned a total of 8 All-Defense teams. Due to his service in the US Navy, Robinson didn't debut in his rookie season until the age of 24, and if he had got an earlier start to his career like many players do, then he would likely have even more defensive accolades than he already does. Number 4. Wilt Chamberlain. He's most famous for his accomplishments on offense, but Wilt was arguably just as dominant on the defensive end of the court. Since blocks and steals were not officially tracked until 1973, it's basically impossible to accurately estimate his defensive numbers over the entirety of his career. With that being said, Wilt's blocks were unofficially tracked over a 112-game span, and he averaged a mind-blowing 8.8 blocks over that stretch. Obviously, blocked shots are difficult to compare across eras, considering numerous variables, like how the three-point line didn't exist yet. But regardless, that's still insanely impressive no matter how you slice it. There are many examples of Wilt controlling games defensively. Some may say that he should be in the number 1 spot, based on his insane numbers and reputation. But I would disagree, as Wilt also had a bit of a reputation for occasionally taking some nights off defensively. Nonetheless, I certainly believe he deserves a spot in the top 5. Number 3. Dennis Rodman. The Worm's case defensively is a bit more complicated than some people may realize. Statistically, he was nothing to marvel at, as he has never had a single season where he averaged at least 1 block or 1 steal. What he did well, though, was frustrate the offensive player with his smothering on-ball defense, and force him into either a bad shot or into passing the basketball. I also believe that Rodman had the most versatile defensive career of all time. At different points in history, he was assigned to guard the best player from every position on the court. In the 80s, he was asked to guard Magic Johnson at point guard, Michael Jordan at shooting guard, and Larry Bird at small forward. And then in the 90s, he was asked to guard Karl Malone at power forward and Shaquille O'Neal at center. And Rodman did more than an adequate job of all of those tasks. In his career, he made a total of 8 All-Defense teams, and he won the Defensive Player of the Year in back-to-back seasons as a member of the Bad Boy Pistons. Number 2. Hakeem Olajuwon. I've said it once, I'll say it again. The Dream was an absolute nightmare on defense, as he had the length, athleticism, and intelligence to be one of the select few greatest defenders ever. Officially, he's the NBA's all-time leader in blocked shots, and second place isn't even close. On top of that, he's currently 10th on the NBA's all-time list in total steals, which is completely insane for a center. The closest center to Hakeem is David Robinson, who is 54 spots below him on the all-time list. Over his career, Hakeem made 9 All-Defense teams and he won the Defensive Player of the Year twice. It is worth mentioning that he finished in the top 3 of the Defensive Player of the Year voting a whopping 6 times. A couple things that are rarely appreciated about Hakeem was his chase down speed and his lateral quickness, which helped him block and contest many shots from speedy guards and wings. He was truly the standard of defensive excellence in the 1990s. Here is my list of honorable mentions. Feel free to pause the video for a longer look. Should any of these players have made it into the top 10? Let me know below. Number 1. Bill Russell. Back when Russell and the Celtics dominated the NBA, the Defensive Player of the Year did not exist yet, so because of this, they often gave him the MVP award instead. Russell was a relentless competitor, and with his Olympian level of athleticism, he established himself as arguably the greatest rim protector in the history of the game. Just like Wilt Chamberlain, who I mentioned earlier, Bill Russell's blocks and steals were never officially tracked. But that doesn't entirely mean that we couldn't gauge his defensive impact. In 11 out of his 13 seasons in the NBA, Russell led the league in defensive win shares. That's more than doubled second place, which is George Mikan and Tim Duncan with 5. The most Defensive Player of the Year awards by one player is a total of 4, which is an honor shared by Ben Wallace and Dikembe Mutombo. If that award had existed during Bill Russell's era, then he likely would have at least doubled that total. Bill Russell built a legacy for himself and won 11 championships with defense as his greatest skill set, in the same era that Wilt Chamberlain played in the NBA. If that isn't a strong case for being the greatest defender of all time, then I don't know what is. So what do you guys think? How does your list differ from mine? I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments section below. Thanks for watching as always, make sure to like and subscribe for more basketball content, and I'll see you guys in the next video.